Hi everyone, it's Annabelle and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be repotting all of the orchids that I recently purchased in a Lucke Orchideen haul. I'll link you to that video in the corner and down below. Mostly Cattleyas, got a few Dendrobiums, a few of these are for other people, but I'm going to repot them since we grow in similar setups and they've all got new growth, so now is an ideal time. I'm going to start off with the Brassivola Little Stars, which is probably the most challenging repot here. It's potted in a chunk of coconut husk. I've had this situation 3 times before and each time I pretty much mangle the root system, but I thought it would be interesting for me to choose some of the more difficult repots here or just kind of representative repot for one of them as well, and just show you guys on camera what I do when faced with a slightly unconventional repot. So, Brassivola Little Stars in a chunk of coconut husk. First of all, going to squeeze this pot to free it. Coconut husk is flexible and the stuff that these come in is from when the seedlings have been put into them basically. So this is very old coconut husk, it's very soggy. I've soaked this for a couple of hours in a nutrient solution, so it's just going to pull apart, and I'm just going to literally pull away the coconut husk threads and try and reveal and free the roots where possible. And there's also a weed growing in this one, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to be fast forwarding through this so you guys don't have to see a slow repot, because this is going to take me quite some time not to damage the roots. As you can see, this is a very wet, soggy medium and it just kind of peels apart, often taking bits of roots with it. You just need to be as careful as possible, but at the end of the day this plant is putting out new growths, so we're just going to have to go with it, do what we can, remove as much of this as possible. Well, we need to remove all of it, so without damaging roots as much as possible. But again, don't feel bad if you damage roots with this situation. This is kind of an impossible situation with a repot. Just do your best. Roots are going to get damaged. With Cattleya types, damaged roots will often die off after the repot, so it's kind of annoying. Wait for new growth and do your best. I can't keep an orchid in this, so for me, get it out as soon as possible. A natural little division has also broken off here, so I will pop that up in the same pot. So now that we've sped through most of the coconut husk removal, I'm just going to show you what the kind of root system looks like in there and the best way that I find to remove it, which is literally just to peel back like this. And you can see it comes off very easily, it just tends to stick to roots unfortunately. So you just see there's like a plug in the middle of more coconut husk, which is very strange. But we're just going to pull that out. There's weeds growing in this, so this branching thin root system that you can see dangling below, that is not the orchid's roots, so we are going to pull those off at some point, and don't panic, they're not the orchid's roots, that is some sort of a weed that's in here. Hopefully the orchid will recover just fine because it's got a new growth that haven't put out roots yet, so it's at a great stage for the repot, and we are going to lose probably most of this root system, but even knowing that these roots are likely to die, I will still leave them on and pot them, because before they die they're going to function to some extent and take up some nutrients and water that the plant requires, and it's going to help the plant to get enough energy and nutrients in it to put out new roots following the repot. So I leave them on, and then in a couple of months I will probably take this out of the pot and trim off the damaged or dead root system. That's kind of how I operate with Cattleya repots, and most repots and conversions to semi-hydro. So this is the weed root here, which I'm just going to pull off without trying to... Oh, it just came off quite easily. That's not orchid roots. I don't know what on earth it is. As you can see, I'm actually repotting outside today. It's a beautiful day and we're going to do some pest treatments afterwards just as a preventative. It's a beautiful sunny day. I'm filming under my tree, so in like dappled shade. There's a nice breeze, air movement, so they're going to dry off quickly, so this is a great opportunity to repot outside. And I'm just literally going to work through, I've got about 13 orchids here to repot, so I'm just going to work through them and just show you a few rather than all of them. It's probably going to take me a few hours to do this all, so you don't want to see a few hours of repots, I'm sure, when most of them are going to be kind of repeat the same steps over and over. So I think we've got most of the coconut husk off here. So what I'll do after I've got that off is I will just go and rinse this under a tap on really high, just to try and dislodge any remaining bits of debris. But I'll get as much as possible off with fingers, and then the tap will work to dislodge the rest. If you're really struggling and you can't get a lot of this off with your fingers, then tweezers, or if you actually go to the tap and try working with it under a running tap on high pressure, you can often get some of the stuff out. So that's the kind of situation that we've got at the moment. And this little bit is kind of breaking off as a division, but that's fine. We'll just put that up in there, as I said. So I think we're kind of all done. So I'm just going to go rinse this off and then I'll be back. So I'm going to be repotting most of these into the 1 litre 13 centimetre diameter buckets that I buy in bulk packs of 35 for around £20 from Amazon. These are perfect size for most sort of initial pottings of orchids. It's only when they get bigger that I need to up pot them to 15 or 16 or 18 centimetres. So I've rinsed this for the tap. We've got most of the stuff off. There is a bit left, but these roots are likely to die anyway. They're going to have little micro, even if they don't look like I've broken them, they will have little micro tears, fractures in them that will mean, I don't know with Brassavolas, but certainly with Cattleyas, that they're very likely to die off. So we will come back to that. So I'm just going to fill the bottom of the bucket with leca. So the bottom kind of half of the bucket is just going to have leca filled in so that I can then just place the orchid on top and work around. So now that's filled, I'm just going to place the orchid on top and check my positioning. So I'm quite happy with that. So what I often do is just kind of slightly twist the orchid as I'm putting it in, which helps the roots to kind of spread rather than being in a big chunk and then just filling them around with media, which can mean that you get little air pockets in the middle of the orchid, which is fine with traditional potting media, but with semi-hydro or leca or any self-watering or wicking system, you want maximum contact between the particles because there's always going to be air gaps because they're spheres or kind of irregularly shaped in the case of pumice. But the contact points are where the water is going to wick from, so any big gaps are going to cause problems. So I'm just going to fill around with that and then put a top layer of the non-wicking smooth river pebbles. And for these orchids, because they're Cattleyas, I'm not using the horticultural grit, which is the fine grade. I'm actually going to put the next grade up, which is the RHS washed gravel, which is like smooth river pebbles, which I find Cattleyas find it easier to get their roots down into because the horticultural grit is a fine grade. I find that better for oncidium types who have small thin roots that can pierce little small nooks and crannies, whereas the thicker rooted orchids, I find that the larger grade gravel seems to be better for them. So that's kind of a close-up of the larger grade gravel that I'm using, and they're all nice and smooth, and that's something I'm finding with the horticultural grit. There's lots of almost little porous stones in there that seem to dry a bit more, so I'm trying to pick out more of the smooth stones that are nice and polished. Obviously river gravel, it's been washed by a river and polished by that process, so I think that's the key, is the smooth texture of the top layer, because any kind of rough texture is likely to be a bit more porous and a little bit more drying, it seems. I'm learning as I go along with this process. This isn't something that I've been doing for very long, so I'm still kind of trial and error and seeing the best way to optimize it. So I think we're pretty much done for this repot. So that's the Brassavola little stars, and I'm quite happy with the repot on that. Yes, we've damaged the root system. This was never going to be an easy repot in that coconut husk chunk, but we've still got roots left that are going to take up nutrients and moisture until they die off, if they do die off. And we've got new roots on the way because new growths haven't produced new roots yet. So we are just going to move on to the next orchids. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here. So I've done most of them, and I've got 3 more orchids to do here. So most of them were just very easy bark repots. They didn't have any plugs at all, so I can really credit Lucke for that because they'd all been very freshly repotted in bark, so the repots were just a dream. So next we're going to repot the Cattleya Pink Star, which is a cross between Cattleya lodogesii and Laelia rupestris. So this is again just a standard bark repot, so this is a kind of representative example of what all my other repots have been, to be honest, and I will show you a couple of the root systems after. As you can see, I've got a little new growth here, which is really exciting, lots of new root tips, fresh bark, really nice clean repot I think ahead of us. So I'm just going to zoom through me taking the bark off. So I've got most of the bark off, so the stuff that's more attached to the roots I'm just going to be more careful with picking off, and the best way I find to remove bark is to actually kind of hold the root and get your nail between where the bark is joined onto the root and just very gently pull away. And I'm just going to show you some root porn here. Look at all the branching tips on this single root. I find that older roots with lots of branching points on them tend to survive the semi-hydro transition, or be more likely to, than older roots that are kind of looking like they're a bit past their best. I guess when they've still got growth points on that are really active, more energy is being pumped into that root, which maybe helps it to transition more easily, because I found that a lot of things, if a root's got a growing tip, even if it's an older root, not necessarily a new root, it seems to survive the repot, or be more likely to, than just old, slightly rubbish looking roots. So I've got all the bark off and I've rinsed that off under the sink on a high kind of jet. Just going to sterilise my tools between repots, and I also always, if I don't change my gloves, I always ethanol down my gloves, and this isn't with my 70% isopropyl alcohol that I use for orchids. This is a 90% ethanol surgical spirit. I think it's 90% ethanol, 5% methanol, and it's also got some glycerol or something in like that. So this one's a little bit more heavy duty for cleaning. So I'm just going to trim off all of the dead or older looking roots here that aren't going to do so well, or that are already dead. So what I tend to do, I judge it on a case by case basis. If the orchid has got loads of live roots, I will take off any that look a little bit dodgy if they're older and look like they might not survive the process, because if it's got loads of roots, it doesn't need old dodgy roots. In this case, the older roots are apparently all dead or looking a little bit dead, but obviously we've got new roots. This is often the case with Cattleyas. I seem to find some species more than others, but you'll find that the older parts of the plant, the roots are often dead on. So I'm just going to fast forward through me trimming off the dead roots here. So dead roots are all off, and I've left on the good roots, new roots and older roots that have still got branching points on or still feel nice and firm. And again, I will come back to these later. I tend to repot fairly regularly, to be honest, just to kind of adjust orchids in their pots, because with semi-hydro inorganic, repots are kind of a dream. So I don't have any issues just taking an orchid out of the pot and having a look at the roots and adjusting it if it's kind of climbing up and trying to get it more evenly in the pot. So I'm going to do the same as last time and just fill the bottom half of my 13cm bucket with leca. And we're just going to position the orchid in the pot on top of that leca now. And I think I filled this a little bit full, so we're just going to empty out a little bit of that just to get it more a bit lower in the pot. And you can always pull the orchid up as you put the leca in, which helps some of the roots to stay a little bit deeper, which can stabilise orchids a little bit until they attach to the leca. So I'm happier with that kind of positioning. So I'm just going to fill around that with my leca pumice mix. That's all done now, so I'm just going to add my non-wicking washed river gravel top layer. And for these, to wash these, I do the similar sort of washing process as my leca. So straight from the bag, I'll take it out, I'll do a few rinses, and then I'll boil it. And this is because somebody mentioned that they found some snails in their horticultural grit, and those bags do sit outside in the warehouses and the garden centres. So I started just boiling it up as a precaution. Obviously it gets it cleaner as well, and then I do a few more rinses to get it to the stage where it's at now, where it's ready to go on the top of orchid pots. I just feel like that will also kill any bacteria or anything that are sitting on there. So that is the Cattleya Pink Star, all repotted, and it does have a few sheaths. I don't know if it'll actually do anything. Show you the kind of mix and the pumice in there. So we're going to move on to our next orchid, and again just sterilise my tools with the 90% ethanol surgical spirit, and also sterilise my gloves as well. I would just change my gloves at this point, but gloves are kind of in short supply at the moment. So I'm near the end of my pack of disposable gloves that I bought way before any of this COVID-19 situation. I don't think I'm going to be able to get any more for a little while, so I am trying to stick to one pair of gloves per repotting session at the moment and just ethanoling my gloves heavily in between, which is what we do in tissue culture anyway. So the next orchid that we're repotting is the Dendrobium Memoria Christa Erdmann crossed with Thursiflorum, and that is in just plain coconut husk this time, no chunks, which is amazing. So this should be a fairly easy repot. To me, this almost looks like they've taken a division or a little keiki or something off and grown it up because of how small the root system is. I am going to still put this into a 13cm bucket because of the size of the plant. I'm just going to fast forward through me removing the coconut fibre husk, which should be quite an easy job. So the coconut husk is all rinsed off. Very easy to remove. Just going to remove a few of the little dead roots that I can see here. There aren't many, but just going to remove what I can see. Just a couple in the centre there. So this orchid looks to have a really great root system, and they all look to be recently put out, which again kind of leads me to believe that it was a keiki that they took off. But yeah, compared to the size of the plant, the root system itself is very small. In organic media, this would mean that you would want to put this orchid into a smaller pot, because organic media relies on wet-dry cycles, so to open up air pockets in the media and to allow good sort of reoxygenation around the root zone for the gas exchange that's necessary. So this one I'm just going to pop into a 13cm bucket. This is probably the similar sort of pot size to what I would use if I was using organic media though, this little glass. So bear that in mind if you're using organic media. But with inorganic media, obviously we've got constant air gaps provided by the spherical rigid media. So wet-dry cycles aren't a concern. In fact, we actually want things to be staying constantly moist. So pot size then becomes a little bit less important. Also, a bigger pot is going to help to stabilize this orchid because it is very unruly. I am also going to stake it up. So I'm just going to fill the bottom of the pot with the lacquer again. Just going to pop our orchid into that pot and fill around it with the media. To hold it steady while I do that, I'm just going to pop a stake in, and I happen to have a clothes peg next to me. I will replace this with a proper orchid clip at some point, but just while I fill around it, we're just going to peg the orchid onto the stake there to make it easier for me to work with while I'm kind of doing the repot. So I filled around with the lacquer pumice mix, and I tried to use a slightly smaller grade lacquer for this one, just to help stabilise it a little bit more, and it seems to be quite moisture loving given the fact that it has been in coconut husk. So usually the larger lacquer kind of floats more, and the smaller lacquer, as I get towards the bottom of my little bucket of lacquer, has kind of sunk more to the bottom. So by the time I'm getting to the end of my tub, it's just smaller lacquer anyway, which is a little bit better for me for this orchid, I think. Lacquer size is going to affect the amount of moisture retained and the wicking efficiency. Smaller lacquer, you're going to have more contact, I guess, between each individual lacquer piece and less air gaps. So many considerations with inorganic or organic media even. Size of media is actually quite a large factor in how wet things stay and the amount of aeration in the media. So that's all done, so I'm just going to pop my pebble top layer on again. It also helps to stabilise orchids, which is going to be very beneficial for this particular unruly, unstable dendrobium. So this is the dendrobium that produces the large sprays of flowers, although I've never seen this cross flowers because I tried researching it, and I can see the parents, the Memoria Christa Erdmann and the Thursiflorum, both have very similar kind of flowers. Memoria Christa Erdmann is a cross between Farmeri and Griffithianum, so I'm quite excited to see this cross, but there are no images that I can find available of it. So that is all repotted and much more stable in the pot, so it's actually going to stand upright. Next up, we're going to unmount the Dendrobium unicum, which I received in this order. I don't do well with mounted orchids, and I don't have anywhere to keep mounted orchids. I don't have anywhere to hang them that they're not going to drip on other orchids after watering. Usually I don't have the availability to water. Obviously I'm working from home all the time at the moment, so I definitely could, but while I'm doing this repot session I'm just going to take it off. This mount's been soaking for about 3-4 hours in nutrient solution, so the wood has become a little bit more pliable, and obviously the roots are going to soften up and become more flexible, so that's very important when you're removing something from a mount, particularly to give it a few hours soaking time. So I'm just going to remove the wire that is attaching this orchid. It does look like it does have roots attached onto the mount. There is a new growth starting, and we do have 2 buds on this orchid, which will probably last with me fiddling around with it like this, and the fact that it's moved locations as well, but I would just rather get it off. It's got very fine roots, which to me indicates that it probably would like a little bit more moisture when it's actively growing. Obviously it does have a drier winter rest, I believe, but I'm going to repot it into a completely different mix, the same one that I use for my Dendrobium leonis, because I feel like dendrobiums with finer roots like this don't do so well in leca mixes. My Harveyanum as well is very fine rooted and did not like leca. I had to put it into a Ceramis mix and it's doing much better. So I tend to go by root size. If I don't know much about the orchid, I look at the roots and the orchid kind of structure. To me, this looks like it wants a finer mix because it's got finer roots. So I'm going to put it into a mix of small grade pumice, Ceramis and leca. And I think that will be a nice airy yet more moisture retentive mix. And the smaller media size will probably suit the smaller thinner roots on this a little bit better. So that was very easy to remove from the mount. It had a little moss pad that it was attached with. I'm just going to rinse the roots quickly, although they're not really dirty at all. And we're going to put it into this smaller pot here, which is a little acrylic cup, which is actually reusable, and I really like these. They're quite thick. Cost me about £4 for a pack of 4, so they're more expensive, but for a small size semi-hydro cup, I do really like them. So I'm just going to show you the kind of mix that I'm using with this orchid. So as you can see, I've got mainly kind of smaller grade pumice and Ceramis, but there is a little bit of leca mixed in here. And I've also mixed in something called Super Light Black, which I think is a small leca, although I'm still testing it. I'm going to be showing the results in an inorganic media test fairly soon. I got it from Kaizen Bonsai along with this small grade pumice. So those are the 3 main components: the small leca, which is called Super Light Black, the small grade pumice and the Ceramis. So I'm going to use more of this mix for the top layer, whereas the layer that's actually sitting in the reservoir, I've used a mix of larger pumice and leca. This is also quite important when using a finer grade media because it can exit the flushing holes. So what I like to do is put the larger grade media to just above the flushing hole, and then the smaller grade media sitting on the top to stop it flushing out so much. So I'm just going to fill around this orchid with the mix, and then I'm going to top it with a top layer of the non-wicking pebbles again, which will help to stabilize it and also help to stop algae forming, which is kind of a problem with Ceramis mixes. Now, some very fine rooted, very sensitive orchids don't actually like the dry pebble top layer, even though it's non-porous and non-wicking. Just the lack of humidity seems to be an issue. I found this with seedlings, so I will have to monitor the unicum and see what it's like. Dendrobiums in general are quite resilient. So that's all filled in, and there's a close-up of the potting mix that it is in. As you can see, there's quite a lot of air pockets still, but hopefully they'll suit the fine roots of the orchid better having a finer mix. And then I'm going to top it with my non-wicking pebble river pebble top layer. And just pop a stake in there to stabilise the orchid, and we are all done. So that's the Dendrobium unicum all repotted. And just quickly, I'm going to show you one of the orchids that I repotted off camera to show you the kind of root system that it came with. So this is my friend's orchid. This is the LC Little Lemon Drops crossed with Cattleya, why not? And as you can see, we have an amazing root system on this. Now my next step is going to spray all these orchids down with a mixture of dish soap and neem oil. The soap is necessary to emulsify the neem oil into solution, and soap in itself is also insecticidal. I think it's important to just show you where I'm currently doing this repotting at the moment. So I'm sitting on this bench under the tree. Obviously I have cleared away the orchids now, but it made me think when I was applying the neem oil soap solution that I should really point out that neem oil can cause quite severe burns on the orchid if it's exposed to hot sunlight after oil application. This is the case with any oil, but neem particularly seems to cause UV sensitivity. So I'm currently in dappled shade underneath a tree, and this is sort of late afternoon, so it's not the hot midday sun, and there's lots of air movement on the leaves. So I'm filming in shade, and I felt like it was important to show you where I'm filming because that is quite relevant when applying neem oil. And I'm just going to leave these orchids, after I've sprayed them down with this solution, outside until night to really get them dry before going into my orchid room. I don't have any quarantine space at the moment, which is why I'm doing preventative treatments with all new orchids. So neem oil will kill any spider mites, and it's also reported to kill mealybugs and that sort of thing. I haven't found it particularly useful for thrips. I had to use a systemic insecticide to get rid of thrips. But for me, my main issue here is spider mites. I've repotted them, so any media has been removed, and I can't see any signs of thrips at all on these orchids, so it's just kind of a case of I'm going to be doing regular sprays for thrips anyway, so I'm just going to do neem oil for now and soap. The soap will also help to wash the orchids down and just kind of give the leaves a little bit more shine. So I'm doing that for all new orchids at the moment, and it's a perfect day to do it outside, so I thought I'd show you guys my spray treatment. If you want more information on the neem oil percentages that I use, I'll link you to my video on the issues I had with thrips last year and how I got them under control. So I'm just going to spray these all down and then leave them to dry off. And it's important to spray thoroughly the tops and undersides of the leaves as well. So that is my repots all done. So now what I'm going to do is flush through the pots with just plain 0 water. So that's 0 parts per million TDS water that I use from the zero water filters in place of RO or rainwater. So I'm flushing through the pots really thoroughly, and then I will flush through again with nutrient solution to top that reservoir back up with a seaweed and nutrient solution. And I give quite a high seaweed starting dose to new orchids compared to my maintenance seaweed dose. So that is my repots all done, and I hope you enjoyed this repotting video and found it interesting. It's quite long and hopefully it wasn't boring. Thank you so much for sticking with me and watching today, and if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a like or subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye!